Welcome to Discerning Faith Podcast. I am Daryl,
I am Nathan.
and we're going to keep walking through the Bible, we'll say, through the books of the Bible and trying to kind of do a quick overview of them, or relatively quick.
Yes.
And we'll have our fun asides and things like that. Hopefully you find them fun. We enjoy them, but hopefully you do too. But so last time we talked about Numbers. We only got through one book last time. There's a lot in Numbers.
We always struggled to get through that with the technical issues, so
we won't talk about that again. But hopefully technology will cooperate
yes.
this time. So the recap of Numbers basically is rebellion, God's faithfulness, rebellion of the people, God's faithfulness, brings them to the promised land. They don't trust in him. So the older generation dies off. Moses dies off with them because of his own sin. And then it's basically we're kind of at the very end of Moses's life as we go into Deuteronomy.
Yes.
So if you want to know more about Numbers, go back and watch the last one. But that's kind of the quick overview of Numbers and what we talked about. And of course, there's Balaam thrown in there in his donkey.
Yes.
So Deuteronomy.
What does that mean? That's a weird word.
Apparently it's Deuteronomion.
Deuteronomion?
Yes. I think that's the Latin. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it looks close enough to me.
Sounds good. But somehow it means second law. So we're going to see, I think there's a few new laws, but it's mostly just a recounting of the laws that have been given up to this point.
Yes.
God is progressively revealing who he wants his people to be through these laws. Starting back all the way but really, Exodus with some of the 10 Commandments and things like that. But then he slowly is revealing who he is really to them, but also who he wants his chosen people to and to set them apart. So there's a lot of repetition in Deuteronomy,
including both the laws and of their history. But we do that because one, as we as people are quick to forget. It's also a reminder because if we remember from last time, this is the new generation that's getting ready to go in. So it's a reminder of what has gone well for those few things for the previous generation, but also what a lot went poorly for the previous generation. And so a warning to this new generation who is about to go into the promised land, not to make the mistakes of their forefathers and to learn from them instead. So,
yeah. So we don't ever need repetition to remember things, do we? We don't forget. Ever.
Nah,
we're better. We're more enlightened than back then. No, repetition is good. The other thing that's cool is this may not be the same necessarily as the laws. Although I think as you interact with God's laws, you learn who he is more and you understand more of who he is and what he expects of us. But that becomes more nuanced as you understand law better. But more importantly for us today, we still should interact with those laws. They're still helpful and useful and they help us. But the more we interact with God's word, the more he brings out in us a godly thought process, a godly character. And so, we should constantly be in the word. We should constantly be interacting with God and allowing his spirit to change us from the inside out. So repetition is good. How many times have you read the same passage for literally what feels like the 100th time, potentially literally the 100th time, and God goes, you didn't see that there before, did you?
Nope, there's always going to be something new.
And it's just a really cool thing. So this is really mostly a speech by Moses throughout most of Deuteronomy. So he kind of goes through a history of their journey thus far and kind of talks about the ups and mostly the downs, because that's mostly what there are.
Yes.
So, and recounts those.
Their early journeys, their wanderings in the desert, some of their early conquests, because there were some pre-entry conquests that they did have before going into Joshua as well. And so some of the early victories they had against some of those kings as well. A review of the law and what God has given, and maybe some clarification on some things as time has gone on. Like, okay, remember these details as well. It's a lot of repetition, as we said, as we've repeated. It's a lot of repetition.
But also it's a remembrance of God's blessings for obedience and judgment for disobedience. And I'm going to throw this in here that's not in our notes. It's also just a reminder of God's faithfulness. Because throughout all of this, God could have thrown them away. In fact, is it in Deuteronomy? No, it's in Numbers where God goes, I'm going to wipe them all out. And Moses is like, but God.
Exodus, actually.
Is it Exodus?
Mhm.
Okay. It's somewhere in there, guys.
I will make you a nation if you want, Moses. Nope. For your name's sake, Lord,
Yeah.
and for all the other nations that are going to hear of this, because again, other nations are still hearing of God's work. Best keep these people around just to show that you can work through even a numbskulls.
Yep, absolutely. So, remembrance of God's faithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
It also kind of talks about Moses' final days. Again, this is kind of his final address to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Before he goes the way of his fathers, as the way is said.
Yes.
In fact, it's kind of interesting because literally Moses finishes his speech and then walks off and literally dies is the way that it's presented now. I don't know if it's perfect.
It's like, okay, there it is, and you're just going to be. Actually, the Lord buries him up there. Is one of the interesting things about that passage is, well, if Moses died alone, who buries him? And it says God Himself buries Moses. And interesting. Then there's later passages that talk about there's disputes over Moses' body, but that's a side we'll get to maybe when we get to, I think it's Daniel on that. So.
Yeah. So also in Deuteronomy is one of my favorite passages personally in Scripture, and something that's a good reminder, especially as a parent, of the Shema.
Mm-hmm.
Shema is a Hebrew word for listen or hear, and it's not English language, and we treat it so very. It's not a precise language, first of all, but also we treat it very informally. But listener here is kind of like, we almost take that as, okay, well, I heard that. But it's not only a listen or hear, but it's a put into practice and obey, right?
It's like what you do with your children. You don't want them just to hear your words and go off and ignore them and not actually do what you told them to do. There's action I expect and require of you in regards to the words that I did just give you as well.
Absolutely. So the Shema is, we're going to read this here in a minute, but Deuteronomy 6:4-9 is one of the passages, the main passage. And there's a couple other ones, one from Numbers, I think, and another one that might still be in Deuteronomy as well.
I think it's chapter.
Yeah. But we're only going to really focus in on the Deuteronomy 6 part. But they pray this in Jewish culture still to this day during Jewish worship twice a day. So it's also the first, I know, it's something you have to learn for your bar mitzvah, I believe. I've heard.
Yep.
And it's just something that Jewish people inundate their children with. It's something that faithful Jews, it's just ingrained in their kids. And so Deuteronomy 6:4-9 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates."
If you remember, we've used this passage several times now throughout other episodes as well. It is a key passage, one of the most key passages about who God is, and especially to the people of Israel throughout the entire Bible. So,
but it's also very important for us as well to put that into practice. Again, I say this especially as a parent, because, it's kind of like later talks about, well, as you're walking, that your child may say, well, Dad, what's that about? Or whatever, and it's to prove what God has done. That's why we do memorials. That's why we repeat everything like we do as Deuteronomy is doing, is so we don't forget. We've talked about this on the podcast quite a few times too, but how many times does Israel go awry because one generation will be faithful, but they don't pass that on to the next generation, and then they don't know the Lord in it.
Spoiler alert for the book of Judges, quite a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's so important that, one, we're doing it for ourselves, but also we're passing it on to that next generation, because no one else is going to do it. The world's going to pass on a worldly heritage.
Yes.
And an evil heritage.
Yes.
Right. And so we have a duty, we have a responsibility to teach the next generation. And I would even say, it's not even just parents, it's grandparents, it's other people in the church. We should, the whole saying that it takes a village to raise a child, it sounds kind of hokey to us now, but it's true. It does. there are relationships that are built from adults to other people's children that are hugely beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there's things that your kids just aren't going to hear from you personally.
Yes.
It's hard as that parental relationship to sometimes speak into certain things for your kids. So you need other godly men and women building into them, and at all times, this sounds so silly, but I'm just going to share it anyway. But as I was driving this morning, there was a beautiful sunrise, and I took a picture, and I'm looking forward to showing my kids that and kind of talking through that. I'm going to shout out another YouTuber that Nathan and I know both really like. It's called Smarter Every Day.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really smart scientist guy. He's worked for NASA. He's worked for the Department of Defense. But he's a Christian as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he loves to just so for instance, the one I was watching with my kids last night, it's about cicadas. And everybody's like, cicadas, what? Who cares? That noise that they make is kind of interesting, right? So he goes out and he kind of goes into okay, he takes, I don't know what you call it, but something that measures sound. I don't know the technical term for it because I'm not that smart, but he realized, wait, there's two frequencies going on during this. Is it like male and female? Is it another animal we're picking up or whatever? So he just goes through and goes, and gets a high-speed camera out and figures out, how does this work? What's going on? I don't remember why I'm going down this rabbit trail, but here we go.
Remembering God's testimonies and passing them on.
Yes. And so we really love interacting with that, and we learn about God. And so being able to pass that on to my children, my kids were enraptured with it as much as I was. But passing on that enthusiasm for what God has done and how he has made, by the way, go up, look that one up. It's amazing the way God made cicadas. But anything on his is really cool. But you can learn about God's creation in such a different way. But passing on that, when you see something that God is doing or something that hits you in a different way, talk to your kids about it. It's so easy to just go, hey, look, I was reading in the Bible and this is something that hit me today. I do that with my wife really well. I don't always do it as well with my kids because sometimes it's hard, different ages and stuff.
Yes.
But still, something as simple as nature, I think, is a good place to start. Most kids like animals. Most kids like pretty colors, for lack of a better term.
Being outdoors.
So that's a good, easy place to start in my mind.
Yes.
And to go, God designed this. So, you think of something like a cicada and think, okay, it makes a big noise. Cool. But then when you really look into it, God's design in it is amazing. Again, go see that. It's awesome. But basically there's a resonance chamber and all these kind of things that are it's really intricate. And it's a cicada. And most of us will look at it and go, it's an insect. Who cares?
Gross.
Exactly. In fact, the one thing I will warn you, if you're squeamish about bugs, he does let them crawl all over him during the video, which is kind of weird, but that's what he does.
He's a redneck.
Yeah, he is. He's from Alabama or something. He doesn't know any better. But those kind of things, finding those, in our society, we're going to probably watch some television or streaming or something. Find a way to use it to do something that's of use. I watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with my kids. I still love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'm a dork like that. We watch some DC stuff sometimes, but I also try to really be intentional too, to watch things that will bring them in contact with the things of the Lord. We actually found another YouTube thing, Lamplighters. And what it is, it's about a lot of missionaries or martyrs. And it's very well done for young kids because it doesn't show the graphic violence that comes with some of that stuff and everything. So all that to say, there's all kinds of avenues now. We can talk about the internet and YouTube being terrible in some ways, and there's all kinds of bad things, but there's also a lot of really amazing things that God uses. And so thinking of Deuteronomy 6 and, think about these things, teach these things to your children. We should be doing it at all times.
Yes.
And there are all kinds of tools we can use. And so that's something I take from Deuteronomy a lot is, yeah, there's a lot of repetition. I feel like I just read this. You did, but there's a good reason for it. God knows what he's doing.
Amen.
There. So anyway, that's kind of my long aside there.
Nope, that's good.
Yeah. So, check the time. Okay. So I guess we can go into the next book. You want to start that one since I just talked way too long?
I can do that. So moving on to Joshua, meet the new old guy in charge.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yep. Kind of an aside. We do need to remember he's already an older guy, kind of as Moses was when he got put in charge by the time this happens, because he was part of that, part of the spies from 40 years prior to wandering in the wilderness. So he isn't a young guy who's like, oh, I'll figure out what's going on as it goes along. No, he's been here for a while as well.
It's funny. I always picture Joshua as young. I picture Moses as old and Joshua's young.
I don't remember for certain, but I think in like the Veggie Tales where they're going and circling Jericho and having the Frenchmen throw slushies at them because that's how it worked. That it was I don't remember who it was in that one, but I think it's one of the younger of the vegetables that played him. So it's I think that's at least in some people's mind is it's this young guy. Nope, he's already old as well.
Kind of like in Prince of Egypt when Moses looks like he's maybe 40 at most. He's at least 80 by the time it goes back.
Yep, it's like nope, these are old dudes in charge. Which there's a certain wisdom to that. So, starts off with him being kind of prepped and in charge, and then some preparations for him and for the people in general as they're about to go in and begin this conquest of the land and in fulfillment of God's promise. One of the early ones that is repeated 3 times is that Joshua is told by God and by the people, the leaders of the people and elders, to be strong and courageous, sometimes be very courageous. For a guy who's already getting up there in years, like, you still have strength yet left, so still use it and lead these people as you need to, and don't get disheartened because he saw his people. He saw the other 10 of the spies get disheartened before, and he saw everyone else get disheartened before. And so, it's a little bit of speculation, but you wonder if some of that lingered with him, if everyone else's attitude may have started affecting him somewhat, and God was reminding him, don't become like they were. Don't get discouraged. Stay brave. Stay focused on what I've called you to do and what you were faithful to. Well, he was faithful to God in the beginning with being a spy as well. So
yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to, so they're moving into the promised land, but the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh. So the 12 tribes, there's Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. They say, hey, the land's pretty good over here. Can we just settle here instead of going over, I believe it's the Jordan River. Am I right in that?
Yeah. Because they were a lot more on the livestock than the rest of the tribes, and this was good land for livestock. So
So Joshua says, yes, but you have an oath to come when we're ready to come and fulfill and to still be part of the conquest of the Holy Land. You can't just go, okay, well, I'm going to stay here.
Yeah.
You're still, as the tribes of Judah, of Israel, you still have a responsibility to your brothers and sisters and make sure that that's still done. So, and they do fulfill that.
Yes. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Kind of also in the preparation, we read about Rahab, who we've alluded to before, but just again, that the people have already heard what's going on in Jericho, and they've heard, okay, this nation's coming up, and that there is already a fear of God to begin with, but Rahab also has a fear of God as well. Not just the terror of him, but a awe and respect and knowing that he is going to work out his will here. And so she becomes a part of that and hiding some of the spies who go in to check out what's going on at Jericho.
Protects them even to the point, and I guess here's another side. So she lies and says that she doesn't know anything about where they are. They check for them, and she literally hides them.
And actually she says, oh, they came in earlier, but they left before. You better go out before you close the gate, otherwise they're going to get away.
Right. So it kind of comes to, we always talk about honesty is the best policy and everything, and
except for the Egyptian midwife or the Hebrew midwives
in Egypt, and so yes, in general, should we be truthful? Yes. But there are times that it's okay to not be truthful if it's for a good purpose. Now, this isn't the little white lie, I'm going to protect someone's feelings. No, this is about big things. Like, there's no doubt to me that when the Nazis were doing their thing, if you protected a Jew, that was the right thing to do. Not only was it not wrong to lie, it was the right thing to do. There are times when being deceitful for that, for a purpose of God is worth it.
Yeah, and these examples are all like stopping wicked people from enacting evil. So with the Hebrew midwives, killing the babies. with Rahab here, it's for stopping the soldiers from killing the spies who were here to enact God's judgment. The people of Israel are here to enact God's judgment on the wickedness of these people.
Right.
And so then it's to prevent an evil from happening to those who are here who are here righteously. Rather than like some lie that just benefits myself and my own pride or my own station or my own prosperity instead. So
right. So because of Rahab's faithfulness, she is actually in the line of Jesus. And so that's kind of an honor that God gives specifically to women throughout some of this narrative. It's really interesting. But he gives them the honor of being in the lineage of Christ. And so that's kind of a cool thing. So moving on. So parting and crossing of the Jordan. So I think we lose the impact of what a crossing a river would have been like back then. There's not
they already crossed the sea. Why is a river that big of a deal?
Right. But I actually have done some research on this because I find it really fascinating. The Jordan is actually very dangerous at flood stage. And of course, that's when they happen to be coming in, is during flood stage. And so God goes, I've done this once for you. Let's do it again. And parts the river and allows them to go over. And then it's a kind of a cool thing. I've actually preached a sermon on this about like remembering. Speaking of remembering, I feel like we just talked about that, right?
I don't remember.
They set up some memorial stones, and it sounds kind of silly to us because it's just rocks, but they paint them white, I believe, right? That's I thought they did something like that. Maybe I'm making that up.
I don't remember on that particular one.
But they set up 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel and God's provision. But God kind of allows them, and it's interesting because he has the Ark of the Covenant go with the Levites first, and that parts the seas, through that. God parts the sea or the river. And they walk on across and everything, and they memorialize it. And that's so that, and again, so when your children ask, what's this memorial about? They can say, here's the faithfulness of God. Yeah. So, but they had to cross the Jordan to get to the promised land. So God provided for them to do that.
Yep. And then kind of part of the final bits of preparation is that the second generation has not been circumcised. Fun times for the males. But essentially it says that their fathers had not been obedient in giving the sign of the covenant, which is the sign that they are God's people, to their children. And so there's a need for this generation who was about to go into the promised land to renew it and to show, yes, we are still part of the covenant. We're still part of God's people. And some interesting events happen right after they do this, which hit me a little bit more this time reading through. Again, read it again and again with repetition. It might hit you a little bit differently this time. Is after this renewal of the circumcision, one, the manna stops from heaven because God guarantees, okay, you're going into the land and this will provide for you now. You don't need this miraculous donut-like substance from the sky anymore, even though that sounds really good still. As I am going to provide you with the best of this good land now.
That's good.
So one, that stops. And two, the commander of the Lord's army appears after they heal up from the circumcision as well. Now there's thoughts that this is a theophany. I'd probably agree with this particular instance being a kind of appearance pre-incarnate Christ here, with how Joshua falls down to worship him and the commander of the Lord's army does not rebuke him in doing so, and God does not share his worship with others. I think there's strong evidence for that here.
Well, and angels, anytime that they do worship, someone does worship, like,
see
stop.
that you do not do that.
Yeah. So.
But he appears after they have renewed their part of the commitment as well. So it's just an interesting, kind of a reward for their obedience as they get to see a little bit more of what's happening behind the scenes into these spiritual things here from that. So.
Yeah. So then we move into the first city, because one thing actually we can stop real quick here is it wasn't one nation of Canaan.
Yeah.
It was kind of like city-states, kind of like the Greeks were, originally. And so the first one they come to is Jericho.
They said they come into the city. They first go around.
Yes.
And around,
yes.
and around, and around.
So we talked about Rahab's part in that.
Yes.
This is the city she lived in. And so God has this crazy plan, and literally it's crazy. I mean, it makes no sense when you think of actual battle sense, but
let's have 1 million people walk around the city once per day for 6 days, except on the 7th day, we'll do it 7 times.
And we'll blow up trumpets.
Yeah.
and then the walls are going to fall down.
Mm.
Okay, God.
Except at that one part where there's a scarlet,
Yeah.
red or
Scarlet or whatever.
Yeah. That will show. By the way, we spare this house.
Yeah.
It's the only one we spare this one.
Yep. So clearly, God is going, hey, this is about me, not you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I will do this.
Yes.
And so they do obediently do what God asked them to do, and the walls fall. Rahab spared. However, they don't stay faithful.
Yep.
So
they're instructed beforehand that many times, both by Moses and by Joshua, any of the idols of these people, they're to be wiped out, they're to be destroyed, they're not to be taken by you as possessions or anything like that. Except for somebody does.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So somebody does, but they don't realize it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because God doesn't really confront them with it right away.
Mm-hmm.
So they go into the next battle against Ai, which is actually Jericho was much bigger than Ai. Ai was a lot smaller.
I don't know. ChatGPT has gotten to be pretty big these days.
And so the Israelites are pretty confident. Like, this should be no big deal.
Should be a kick.
I do wonder, this is completely Daryl's extrapolation, but I do wonder if Joshua would have went before the Lord before attacking, if he would have given them any indication possibly. There's nothing in the text that indicates that. That's just me kind of thinking through
it.
But I don't want to represent it as this is a definite thing. This is just my speculation. But, maybe God would have said, hey, hold on, there's sin, and maybe things would have gone differently. But that is not what happens. They go in and they're completely routed by AI. And
they start to get routed. You look at the actual numbers, they don't lose too many people at first, but considering how small it is, it's a lopsided start to the battle, so they all retreat.
At the very least, it's a demoralizing defeat compared to the difference in forces.
Yes.
So they come back, and then God goes, well, one of you people were unfaithful, and so this is your judgment.
Time to figure out who it is. And they start drawing lots to figure out, okay, who is it that's who was unfaithful and sin? They eventually find the culprit.
So was Lot a pretty normal name in that society or something?
They like
Lot. Hey, Lot. No, anyway.
I like drawing Lot. He's just a very handsome guy.
So, and then of course that is dealt with once it's found pretty severely, in that they execute the guy.
But that seems a little bit mean and judgmental of, it's just, it's only that one guy. Why did God punish all the people for that one guy?
It was the whole family too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't they work out the whole family too? I think this is a good point to stop. Before we go further, take out your American brain, take out your modern brain. First of all, God is God and we are not. We don't understand his ways. But he gives us evidence for his ways. I think nowadays we don't take sin as seriously or egregiously as we should.
Yes.
We don't even really take much seriously, but especially what's the common definition, not divination, not the same word, definition of sin nowadays? They talk about it as an archery term, right? And missing the mark.
Yes.
I actually hate that definition of sin. It's not accurate. I mean, I get that that's where the etymology of the word comes from, the origin of the word, but that's not what the Bible bears out. It's overly simplistic, and it doesn't give the weight of what sin is, right?
Oh man, you're just a little inaccurate, but you can do better.
Exactly. And now I know some people will say, well, it's like missing the whole target and missing the mark, so it's more egregious than some people will make it up. But sin is a terrible thing. God cannot abide sin for any iota. The smallest thing you can think of, God cannot deal with that part of sin. God is a just God, so he has to punish sin. So if we sit here and go, well, how dare he kill these people? Well, sin, the wages of sin is a slap on the wrist. No, the wages of sin is death, right? And so we don't take sin seriously enough. Again, I'm going to say this again. Who are we to tell God as to what he should or should not do is another thing. I think there's an arrogance we have in American culture of we know better. especially, and really this isn't just America. I think this is modern culture.
Mm.
Well, those people were idiot, simplistic people who knew nothing.
Mhm.
And these were some superstitions that they had. And we know so much better because we're more enlightened.
Mm.
It's a bunch of bull crap.
Yes.
Sorry. That's a bunch of crap. Realistically, we don't understand sin the way that we should.
Correct.
Sin is just terrible. I beat that dead horse. I'm going to keep beating it. But God will not deal with sin. And the other thing is there are consequences of sin that we don't think about that affect everyone around us.
Mm.
If God were to allow that, first of all, it's no different than if you have your children and I don't correct this one child
Mhm.
fully. Even if I halfway correct it,
Mhm.
the other child gets the idea of, well, that's okay.
This is okay.
It's not that bad.
Well, that guy has an idol, so I guess it's okay if I have an idol, and
Right.
he's worshiping in a different way than we're supposed to worship God. So it's okay if I worship God, this idol, in a different way, and all that.
Absolutely. So sin is literally a cancer that will eat away.
Mhm.
It has to be excised.
Yes.
And I think this goes to something in the modern church that I see a problem with. And now I want to be careful here because these things are sensitive and the whole church doesn't have to know about everything going on.
Mhm.
And so there are probably times that we're just not aware of what's going on with discipline. But there are times that in the church, I feel like as a whole, not speaking about our church or anything general, just a general statement of we don't take church discipline
Mhm.
seriously enough. I think it's because if we don't take sin seriously enough, why would we take discipline seriously?
We also don't take community seriously enough. And it's like, I can just pack my bags and go to a different church next Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, it's the whole individualistic.
Mhm.
Well, that's his sin. He needs to deal with that.
Mhm.
No.
Because it's only his walk with the Lord. It's not a communal faith, even though we've already said multiple times it definitely is a communal faith.
Right. And so no different than the Israelites, if we allow sin in our body, it's going to metastasize
Mhm.
and cause more issues for all of us,
Yep.
right? And God will judge the whole just like we just saw, right? Nobody else had necessarily sinned in this specific instance,
Mhm.
but yet they were judged for this person's sin because of the severity of it.
Mhm.
And so I think we just need to be careful when we read these kind of passages that, first of all, be careful of your arrogance.
Mhm.
And I'm saying this to myself too, because there's times I kind of feel this way too. I struggle with this, but God is bigger than we are. God is a just God who hates sin
Mhm.
and will not abide it. And he's going to do what's best for his people, even if that means one person has to go or one family.
Mhm.
And that is the most just and loving thing he can do.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean we're going to always understand it. Doesn't mean we're always going to like it,
Mhm.
but we need to trust God for who he is.
Yep.
So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, you're good. So they do take care of that. And so God says, go in again. And this time you're going to have them. So they go in, they pretend like they're going to retreat like the first time. And so the people of AI abandoned the city and said, hey, a trap is sprung on you. So we're going to just go ahead and wipe out this city. Great. We did great. Time to keep conquering the land. Hey, where are these people? Who are these people over here? And so they meet this mysterious group of people who have very old clothes and tattered shoes and worn down wineskins, and they want to make a deal with us, and they want to be our servants. This sounds great. We don't need to talk with God about this because that definitely didn't go poorly, right before the first time with AI. I'm sure we can just make a treaty with them, and that won't be any sort of violation.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it looks like it's a couple days later, and you guys look like you actually live here, and we were supposed to wipe you out, but we made a promise with you instead. So unfortunately, after the high of beating AI the second time, they make a foolish treaty with the Gibeonites.
Mm-hmm.
We're one of the people that God said you were supposed to wipe out, but they didn't. They made the treaty first. And then it's a little bit unclear, we think it was foolish that they did this to begin with. Yeah, they were supposed to be obedient and wipe them out as God said. However, it does seem that after they made this treaty that God uses this and says, okay, since you did this, you have to honor the treaty now.
Mm-hmm.
But that God still uses that, we'll see here in a minute, to essentially enact his plan and still continue the conquest of the land. So,
and I know we want to stop here too and talk about, where was I going? Specifically, what the Bible is very explicit on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not, though.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we, based on the consequences of a decision,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to go, well, that was clearly wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was clearly right.
Right, exactly. Either way, but God doesn't necessarily weigh in the text,
Mhm.
right?
And that's
so
at the very
in that
least.
moment for about that. Now, if we know the whole counsel of God, sometimes He does come and say that was right or wrong, and He'll weigh in on it. But just in general, like this is one that right afterward, there's no word from the Lord either way, and so we have to be careful not to. Yeah, I think we can use wisdom and try to say, I don't think that was wise. I think that was clear that they shouldn't have done that per se. But at the same time, God doesn't say specifically, so we have to be careful how we speak through that. We can definitely extrapolate way too far based off of just a little bit in the text.
Yes.
So we just have to be careful with that. So just a warning.
Yep. We do learn a little bit more about the Gibeonites later on, way later on with Saul. When we eventually get to Saul and David and all that, there's eventually going to be a famine in the land because Saul persecuted and killed a lot of the Gibeonites. And so God still, at least at that point, is punishing the people because of the persecution of the Gibeonites who they had the treaty with. So God obviously has some care for them by that point. But again, you don't use that to extrapolate backwards on the original decision.
Right. So, yep. So after that, the Israelites move further into the land and have more conquests that they're supposed to be doing. And they're fighting against, they actually end up fighting against the king of Jerusalem at the time and a conglomeration of other leaders. But the specific reason they actually start to fight them is because they were going after the Gibeonites who they had made this treaty with. And so they had to honor that.
Yep.
So you can look at this in two ways in my mind. First, are they fighting people that they didn't need to, maybe even at the time, because they made a foolish treaty? Maybe.
Potentially.
But God was going to have them conquer these people anyway, so God still uses it for His purpose.
Yes.
And so that's one thing that, when you talk of the sovereignty of God, people get uncomfortable because we like our free will in America in a modern day, but God will work out whatever happens. Like even evil things, going back to when we talked about Genesis, Joseph's brothers meant it for evil, but God used it for good.
Yes.
And so whatever this, and in some ways that's freeing, but also sobering, because I can make bad decisions and God's going to work through it. But I also want to honor the Lord and still make good decisions. Right. And I still want to honor Him with those decisions. And so, but it keeps it's really not about me. It's about me being as obedient as I can be and allow the Lord to work in me. But it's not about my decisions. We can get so paralyzed by the process of analysis, right? So focus on, am I doing God's will? Well, first of all, we know God's will if we're reading the Bible.
Yes.
And most of the time it's not about, should I take this job or that job? It's about who you are, who you are becoming, what obedience looks like. How are you living? And so if we're doing those things, we're going to know God's will a lot of the time. The Spirit's going to help guide us, right? But even if we make a mistake and make the wrong decision, in that moment, if we're following the Lord, we're probably going to be saved from bad, egregious, decisions. But also, we won't be in rebellion because we're trying to. And so if we're not in complete rebellion, there's freedom in decision.
Yes.
Right? But if we're in rebellion, then God will bring that back for our good to go, hey, you're screwing up. You're not paying attention. Come back.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So during the battle, the defense of the Gibeonites, the sun actually stands still for the entirety of the battle.
As long as Moses' arms are up, right?
No, because Moses is dead.
That's right. And what am I thinking? Is that a different battle I'm thinking?
Yes. And it wasn't the sun for that one. That was as long as Moses' arms were up.
They were winning. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. No, but just Joshua calls for the sun to stand still, and God honors that. And so they successfully defend the Gibeonites and defeat several of the kings and peoples that they were supposed to conquer anyway. They'll finish the conquest of Jerusalem later on with David, but essentially they've begun the conquest there. And so the after kind of an up and down start, the conquest that happens during Joshua's time goes well for the rest of it. And so by toward the middle and end of the book, we have instructions for the remaining conquests that are still around, and then also the dividing of the inheritance as well. It should be noted here, I think there's some confusion by a lot of Christians that, well, did God really give all the people the land that he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or not? What's going on here? In Joshua 21, 43 through 45, God mentions that, the Bible mentions that God gave the people all the land that he had specifically promised the patriarchs. What remains to be conquered, as is laid out in the rest of Joshua, and we see in Judges as well, is additional territory to be expanded upon. I think this also gets into confusion about, okay, so some of the people are supposed to be, they're driving out some of the people, but they're supposed to wipe out some of the people as well. Again, the people that they're wiping out are the people of the land that God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And again, we're supposed to be wiped out for their specific horrible sinfulness.
One of the specific one was Molech worship. Once again, we're going to come back to that. Sacrificing their children.
Yep. False idols in terrible, horrible ways. Some of the other nations around were also committing, but maybe not to the same degree as the people they were wiping all together. So those other ones, they were supposed to drive out into exile, or they could actually take their surrender, like the foolishly did with the Gibeonites. They were allowed to do that with other nations around in the future conquest, just not with the initial conquest that they went through as well. So to kind of clarify, like, okay, sometimes the Bible says this, sometimes it says that. It's kind of these two specific things they're talking about. Specific land promised to the patriarchs and to be punished for their wickedness by penalty of death versus additional territory for their growth that God will give them with their prosperity should they be obedient to the covenant. So,
So they settle into the land. They build a memorial altar set up by the 2.5 tribes.
There's almost a civil war over that because of misunderstanding at first, but they talk it out. It's like, no. We just want to make sure that us 2.5 tribes on the other side of the river don't forget that we are part of your people. So this is to remind our children that we are still part of your people, that we're still one people. We're still all the inheritance of God. So,
And then Joshua sets up some charges to the people, be strong and courageous again, but also that he wants them to be a faithful generation, and they have been mostly.
Essentially, one of the last verses, it talks about that the elders, through the lives of the elders of that generation, the people are faithful to God. It doesn't live that long past that, unfortunately, but through that generation, we see that the people are faithful to the commandments and obedience of God. Right after the conquest. So,
And so the key verse for Joshua, which most of you will probably be somewhat familiar with, is Joshua 24:15. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
And that generation did. And the rest of them, Joshua said, you guys can't do it if you're not going to be obedient. And the elder said, no, we will be obedient. And as we just talked about, they were. And so it's a good reminder. It's I think sometimes we get a little bit down, like, oh man, there'll never be a full generation that serves God or anything again. I think it's a charge and a challenge to us that we don't have to be so pessimistic, that if we are very intentional about our elders and our leaders who are kind of guiding us, that we can bring at least one generation, if not multiple, if we train up the next generation well to serve the Lord faithfully. And so I kind of like it as a nice challenge to not just throw your hands up, give up, and say, well, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, so we don't need to worry about trying too hard about having a full generation in our nation that follows God. No, we can still pursue this, and it's still attainable because the power of God is greater than that. So,
amen.
Yeah,
I got nothing else to add to that.
Yep. Probably save Judges and onward for next time.
Yep.
All right. Any other final wrap-up thoughts?
Nope.
Well, hopefully no tech issues this time. Doesn't look like it, so that should be a good sign. Thank you all for joining us. This has been Discerning Faith. The Lord be with you and bless you.